Aliens trap women to reproduce their offspring. The movie starts with a shy girl, Liberty Wells, who has a deep fascination for archaeology. She spent her summer at camp, where she kept mostly to herself, choosing books over conversations with her fellow campers. At the end of camp, her mother, Michelle, picks her up. Michelle, a writer struggling with her career, is the opposite of her daughter: outgoing, talkative, and full of energy. As they drive home, Michelle tries to strike up a conversation about Libby's time at camp, even teasing her about potential crushes. Libby, uninterested and irritated, barely engages, offering curt responses while staying glued to her book. In an attempt to break the tension, Michelle turns on the radio and starts singing along to a silly song. She admits she missed Libby during the summer, and after a brief pause, Libby mutters that she missed her too before returning her focus to the book. A little later, Michelle pulls the car over and suggests that Libby take a turn behind the wheel. Libby points out that she doesn't have a license, but after some persuasion, she gives in and starts driving. As they get close to their lake house, Libby notices a "for sale" sign that catches her off guard, and she nearly loses control of the car. Michelle explains that she's selling one of their lots to help fund Libby's college education. As they drive on, Libby spots a new, pricey-looking watch on her mom's wrist, which seems at odds with their financial struggles. Michelle admits the watch was a gift from her new boyfriend, someone she's been wanting Libby to meet. When they finally arrive home, Libby is captivated by the sight of a handsome young man named John coming out of the lake. He greets her warmly and assures her that he won't interfere with her time with her mother. After John walks away, Libby asks Michelle why she hadn't mentioned him before. Michelle admits she wasn't sure if things would work out between them. Later, John gifts Libby a small box containing a piece of antique jewelry, an old bracelet with a Navajo lifestone, a symbol of fertility. Knowing Libby's passion for archaeology, he thought it would be a meaningful gesture, and Libby is clearly moved by the thoughtfulness. Normally someone who prefers loose-fitting, comfortable clothes, Libby surprises herself by slipping into a flowing dress and joining everyone in the kitchen. During lunch, Libby asks how Michelle and John met. Michelle shares that one day, she arrived home early and found John, a freshwater geneticist, collecting samples from the lake. Curious, Libby begins to ask John about his work. He explains that he studies freshwater species and their adaptation to environmental changes, particularly the impact of global warming on the water supply. As freshwater sources dry up and oceans rise, the remaining water bodies are becoming increasingly saline, and John's work focuses on helping species adjust to these changes. Suddenly, John starts coughing violently and leaves the table. Concerned, Michelle rushes to his side, and as he comforts her, he reaches out with his free hand and touches Libby's bare shoulder, making her uncomfortable. That night, while lying in bed, Libby can't stop thinking about him. She gets up to grab a drink, but as she's heading back to her room, she hears unsettling noises, moans, and cries, coming from Michelle and John's bedroom. Libby approaches the door but panics at a sudden sound and hurries back to her room, diving under the covers. A moment later, John, completely naked, walks out of the room. After grabbing a drink in the kitchen, he lingers at Libby's door, watching her as she pretends to be asleep. The next morning, Libby enters the kitchen and sees Michelle and John kissing. Feeling a wave of jealousy, she interrupts them, reminding Michelle that today is a special day. Their yearly tradition of burying small tokens and letters for themselves and their departed loved ones in boxes in the yard. Libby suggests adding something for her grandfather, who passed away 9 years ago, but Michelle refuses. Hurt, Libby points out how distant her mom always seemed from him, which is why the lake house was left to her and not Michelle. Under pressure, Michelle finally confesses that her father had abandoned her during the divorce, leaving her behind emotionally. Shaken, Michelle returns inside, and Libby takes a walk by the lake. While lifting a rock, she's bitten by a centipede. Angry, she's about to crush it when John appears and stops her. He tells her it's a rare species, and that the centipede was only protecting its young. As he checks the bite, he casually mentions that centipedes are venomous before softly blowing on her hand, which makes Libby feel even more self-conscious. Seeing Michelle upset, John offers to leave if he's causing tension. Libby, confused, asks if he really loves her mother, then encourages him to stay. Back at the house, Libby finds Michelle looking pale and unwell. Apologizing for bringing up past issues about her grandfather, Michelle reveals that John proposed to her and she accepted. Michelle expresses how much she loves him but wants to make sure Libby is okay with the idea of marriage. Taken aback, Libby musters the strength to offer her support, and Michelle, relieved, pulls her in for a hug. In a nervous tone, Michelle then confides that John doesn't know her real age. He thinks she's around 35 when she's actually 42, and asks Libby to keep the secret, fearing it could ruin their relationship. Later, Libby stumbles upon John doing something odd, drinking his own sweat. Alarmed, her curiosity gets the better of her, and she heads to the basement, where John has set up a lab. There, John talks to her about his work on lampreys, ancient parasites that have the rare ability to live in both fresh and salt water. Libby finds his fascination with these creatures unsettling, but she agrees to let him help her collect some new samples. While out on the lake together, Libby brings up John's background, asking about his age and education. John reveals that he's 30 and attended a small private school. Libby tells him about her plans to apply to Cambridge, explaining that she hasn't mentioned it to her mother yet because she doesn't want to worry her. Impressed, John promises to keep her secret. Suddenly, Libby's period starts, and the water in the boat turns red. John reacts quickly, placing his shirt between her legs, a move that leaves Libby feeling shocked. He apologizes, reassuring her that it's nothing to be embarrassed about, but Libby grows even more uneasy when she notices him licking the red liquid from his fingers. Back at the house, Libby heads for a shower. As she removes the bracelet John gave her, she sees a red mark on her wrist. Suddenly, John enters the bathroom. Though he asks if she's all right, he lingers too long and even sniffs her clothes before leaving with his shirt. Feeling increasingly wary of him, Libby tries to call her friend Marley for advice, but there's no answer. She texts Marley instead, telling her that something is off about John and asking her to come over. Later, Libby finds a sandwich and an apology note from John under her door, trying to smooth things over from earlier. As she looks out her window that evening, she spots an eerie orange glow coming from the lake and sees John walking toward it. Rushing outside, she's shocked when the light suddenly disappears, and John, with dry clothes, appears behind her. He claims he must have been sleepwalking, but Libby is skeptical, especially since the front door was closed behind him. The next day, Michelle's health deteriorates, and she asks Libby to pick up some medicine and a pregnancy test from the pharmacy. While in town, Libby sees John talking with another woman. Panicked, she follows them, but is stopped by the pharmacist, who reminds her she hasn't paid for her items. Distracted, she loses track of John and the woman. When Libby arrives home, she finds Marley already waiting for her in the living room. She asks Marley to hang tight while she checks on her mother, only to discover John by Michelle's side. After giving her mom the medicine, Libby hesitates to bring up the pregnancy test with John there, but he assures her that he and Michelle have already talked about it. Libby offers to help more, but John insists he's got it under control, suggesting she return to Marley, adding that her friend seems pretty cool. Back in the living room, Libby fills Marley in on John's unsettling behavior during the boat incident. Concerned, Marley urges her to tell her mom everything, but Libby doubts it'll make a difference since Michelle seems completely taken with John. Determined, Marley decides to confront Michelle herself. The next thing Libby knows, she's waking up in her bed, confused about how she got there. She heads to the living room and finds her mom and John curled up on the couch, watching TV. Libby asks why no one woke her when Marley left, and Michelle casually mentions she was out cold. Then, out of the blue, Michelle announces that she's pregnant and asks Libby for her support. Suspicious, Libby wonders if Marley said something, and Michelle immediately gets defensive, accusing Libby of spilling secrets to her friend. She's adamant that John did nothing wrong despite his apology. Libby tries to argue that his behavior wasn't normal, but Michelle shuts her down, claiming Libby always finds a way to mess things up. She goes so far as to demand an apology from Libby and declares that John is staying. John tries to smooth things over, reassuring everyone that it's all fine, but as he hugs Michelle, Libby snaps, pulling her mother away, only for Michelle to slap her in the heat of the moment. That's when Libby blurts out the truth. Michelle isn't 35, she's 42. The revelation stuns John, who storms out of the house, his face flushed with anger. Furious, Michelle demands to know why Libby has such a problem with John, insisting that he loves her despite all her quirks, and she has no intention of leaving him. Later that night, strange noises from the roof catch Libby's attention. She checks outside but sees nothing. Back inside, she hears shouting from the bedroom, and when she peeks through the door, she witnesses them in bed and notices something strange about John's back. Disturbed, she steps away and sees the eerie glow from the lake again. Unable to shake her suspicions, Libby wades into the water but finds nothing. She drives around to the other side of the lake, where her headlights illuminate what looks like an alien craft. Panicking, she rushes home to tell her mother, only to find Michelle missing. In a frenzy, Libby heads to the basement and is horrified to discover Michelle tied up, submerged in water. Libby struggles to free her, and Michelle, realizing the truth about John, acknowledges that it's too late for her. Just then, Libby hears footsteps and hides, listening intently. It's clear now, John isn't human. The floor is covered in salt water, a weakness to his kind, preventing him from walking on it. His research about adapting to salt and fresh water wasn't for Earth's ecosystem. It was for his own species. Wearing rubber boots, John approaches Michelle, waiting for the creature he believes will be born. When he sees it, his disappointment is palpable. He takes the creature outside and swallows something. Libby seizes the chance to lock the basement door and rushes to call the police, but her phone won't connect. Realizing a device is blocking the signal, she smashes it and finally contacts the police, reporting John as a threat. While waiting for help, Libby glances around and is devastated to find Marley's lifeless body floating in the water. Before she can react, John forces his way back into the basement, grabs Libby by the throat, and reveals his alien form. Desperate, Libby spots a bucket of salt and dumps it on John, who writhes in agony as the salt burns his skin. Taking the opportunity, she pulls her mother from the tank, and they flee the house, only to be attacked. He later regains consciousness, bound in a strange room. She looks up to see several men who look just like John. It dawns on her that the man she saw earlier in town was also one of them. These aliens are using women to sustain their species. The creatures begin tearing down the walls, and John approaches Libby, telling her time is running out. Suddenly, he expels a glowing orb and forces it into Libby's mouth. She struggles but is powerless to resist as she swallows the orb and loses consciousness. When Libby awakens, she finds herself in a diamond-shaped tank filling with water. Around her, she sees other women in similar tanks. It's clear now, the aliens have been using them to propagate their race. What would you do if you discovered aliens were among us? Let us know in the comments. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more exciting content.